All right. So you know that age-old question, city life or village life? I feel like everyone has an opinion on that one.
Definitely.
But today, we're going deeper than just gut reactions.
Okay.
We're going to look at the real advantages and drawbacks.
I like it.
And get this, our main source is a podcast for people learning English.
Oh, wow. That's a cool approach. I like that.
It gives us a totally fresh perspective.
Yeah, and those kinds of materials have to break things down
Right.
in a way that could really reveal a lot about how we think about this stuff.
Yeah, and by looking at how they teach it,
Yeah,
we can see what values they're kind of putting underneath it all.
exactly. It's like
Oh.
we get to be anthropologists for a day.
I love that. Okay, so to set the scene, this podcast, it's for beginners.
Okay.
And in one clip, there are two speakers debating village versus city life,
Classic.
and the language is super simple,
Okay.
which I think is going to be really telling.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even the simplest phrases can reveal a lot about cultural biases,
Totally.
like just the term pros and cons.
Uh-huh.
That already suggests a very logical economic way of weighing these lifestyles,
Yeah.
like it's a business decision.
Right.
But is that really how everyone decides where they want to live?
That's a good point. Okay, so let's break down what they actually say.
Yeah.
For village life, they highlight things like, and I quote, people are more friendly and helpful.
Okay.
They talk about being close to nature,
Yeah.
having strong relationships,
Mhm.
getting support from the community.
Right. It sounds idyllic.
It does.
But it is interesting how even in this super simplified version,
Yeah.
they still acknowledge there are downsides.
Right.
Like they point out that villages might not have all the fancy facilities of a city.
Uh-huh.
So right away, they're hinting at this idea that there's no perfect choice.
Yeah.
Only trade-offs.
I see where you're going with this.
It's very cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Very Western.
Right. Okay, so then for city life,
Yeah.
what do they focus on?
Well, I'm curious to see if they hit the usual points.
Okay. Well, they talk about greater opportunities for things like education, jobs, and entertainment.
Okay, so the classic stuff.
And they also mention diversity
Yeah,
and the chance to experience different perspectives.
makes sense.
Hmm.
But I bet they acknowledge the downsides too, right?
Oh, yeah. They definitely point out that cities can be crowded and polluted.
Right. It all comes back to that cost-benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder if that way of thinking is more common in Western cultures.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it assumes you can just list out the good and bad points and make a rational decision.
Right.
But in many cultures, decisions about where to live are way more complicated than that.
Totally.
They might be based on tradition, family ties, spiritual beliefs,
Yeah.
a sense of belonging that goes beyond just listing pros and cons.
That's such a good point. We're already seeing how cultural values shape our thinking.
Exactly. And that's just from a few simple phrases.
I know. Imagine what we'll find as we dig deeper.
I can't wait. Okay, so what happens next in this podcast?
Well, I'm about to play the clip where they wrap up their whole debate,
Yeah.
and they conclude that it all comes down to personal preference
Oh, here we go.
and trying to find balance if possible.
Yeah.
But is it really that simple?
You're catching up. That conclusion, it screams individualism.
Yeah.
Like personal choice is the most important thing.
Right.
But what about all the factors that are outside of your control?
Yeah.
Family obligations, economic limitations, even discrimination.
Right.
Things that might limit your choices no matter how much you prefer one lifestyle over another.
It's like they're presenting this ideal world where everyone has equal opportunity.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting for language learners.
Okay. So.
Imagine you're new to a culture trying to figure everything out.
Yeah.
You hear this podcast, and it's giving you this very specific, very simplified view of how decisions are made.
It's like they're teaching you the rules of a game that nobody's actually playing.
Right. And that can create a lot of confusion and frustration.
So what can language learners do about that?
Well, it's a tough balance. On the one hand, you want to be open to new ways of thinking, but on the other hand, you need to be critical of the information you're getting.
That makes sense.
Don't just accept everything at face value. Question it, analyze it, and try to see it from multiple perspectives.
So it's not just about learning the language.
Sure.
It's about developing a critical awareness of the culture behind it.
Exactly. And that skill, it goes way beyond language learning.
Yeah.
It's something you can use to navigate any complex issue.
I love how this deep dive is taking us to these unexpected places.
Me too.
We started with a simple question.
Right.
And now we're talking about culture critical thinking, even the nature of language itself.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And speaking of connected, let's push this exploration even further.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
We've touched on the Western perspective,
Yeah.
the perspective of English language learners. But what if we looked at this whole village versus city thing through the eyes of a completely different culture?
Now you're talking. This is where things get really exciting.
Right. We have this framework from our English learning podcast,
Uh-huh.
but it's clearly just one tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay, imagine, for example, the perspective of a nomadic tribe.
Ooh, interesting.
Their concept of home is fluid. It's constantly evolving.
Right.
To them, the idea of settling down in one place, whether it's a bustling city or a quiet village,
Yeah.
might seem completely foreign.
It's like a totally different way of life.
Exactly. They might value adaptability and freedom to roam above all else.
I can see that.
The very idea of being rooted in one spot,
Yeah.
it might feel like a limitation to them.
It really makes you realize how much our own upbringing shapes our views.
It does. And their criteria for choosing a location would be totally different from that pros and cons list.
I bet.
They might prioritize access to resources, proximity to sacred sites, even the presence of certain animals or plants.
Right. It's a whole different way of looking at the world.
It is.
Okay.
And it's not just nomadic cultures.
Okay.
Imagine the perspective of a tightly knit indigenous community.
Okay.
A community whose identity is deeply intertwined with their ancestral land.
Yeah.
They might see the city as a place of alienation,
Uh-huh.
a place where they're cut off from their roots and traditions.
Right.
So their arguments for village life might go way beyond the simple pleasures of community and nature.
Okay.
They might talk about the spiritual significance of the land, the importance of preserving their cultural heritage,
Yeah.
the interconnectedness of all living things.
Oh, it's like we're opening up a whole new dimension to this debate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about all the other cultural perspectives we haven't even considered.
I know. It's mind-blowing.
That's the beauty of this exploration.
Yeah.
There's always more to discover, always more perspectives to consider.
It's amazing how one simple question, village or city, can lead to these profound conversations about culture values and how we see the world.
It highlights the importance of staying curious, challenging our assumptions, and constantly seeking out new perspectives.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to encourage you, our listener, to do just that. Don't settle for the easy answers.
Right.
Dig deeper, explore different viewpoints, and see where this journey takes you.
It's going to be good.
I can't wait. Okay, so we've been really digging into this whole village versus city life thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear that the pros and cons list from that English learning podcast, it doesn't tell the whole story.
No, it's definitely not that simple.
Right, like there's so much more going on under the surface.
Exactly. And for language learners, that can be really tricky.
Yeah, how so?
Well, imagine you're learning English,
Uh-huh.
and you're trying to understand this whole village versus city thing.
Right.
You stumble upon this podcast.
Yeah.
And it presents this very specific, very idealistic way of looking at the choice.
Like it's giving you the wrong map.
Kinda.
Yeah.
It's like they're handing you a set of tools, but those tools are designed for a very particular job.
And that job might not even exist in your reality.
Exactly. And that can be a real trap for language learners.
Right, because you're not just learning the words, you're also absorbing all these cultural messages that might not apply to your situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like the idea that you have complete freedom of choice,
Right.
or that you can just weigh the pros and cons and make a rational decision.
But for a lot of people, it's not that simple.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So how can learners avoid falling into that trap?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it's not like you can just ignore the cultural context.
No, definitely not. It's about finding a balance.
Okay.
On the one hand, you want to be open to learning new ways of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
new ways of expressing yourself.
Right.
But on the other hand, you need to be critical of the information you're getting.
Be a little skeptical.
Exactly. Don't just accept everything at face value. Question it, analyze it, and try to see it from multiple perspectives.
So it's like you're learning the language, but you're also learning to think for yourself.
Precisely. And that skill, it goes way beyond language learning.
It's life skill.
Absolutely. It's something you can use to navigate any complex issue.
Whether you're debating village versus city life or trying to make sense of the news.
Exactly. It's about being an active participant in your own learning.
I love how this deep dive is taking us to these unexpected places.
Me too. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion.
Right. We started with this simple question.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about culture, critical thinking, even the nature of language itself.
It's all connected. And speaking of connected, let's push this exploration even further.
Okay, I'm game.
We've touched on the Western perspective,
Uh-huh.
the perspective of English language learners.
Yeah.
But what if we looked at this whole village versus city thing through the eyes of a completely different culture,
Ooh, now we're talking.
right? Like a culture where the very idea of choosing between a village and a city might seem strange.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
All right, imagine, for example, the perspective of a nomadic tribe.
A nomadic tribe. Okay.
Their concept of home is fluid. It's constantly evolving.
Right. They're always on the move?
Exactly.
Yeah.
To them, the idea of settling down in one place, whether it's a bustling city or a quiet village, it might seem completely foreign.
I can see that. Like, why would you stay in one place when you could experience so much more by moving around?
Right. They might value adaptability and freedom to roam above all else.
The very idea of being rooted in one spot, it might feel like a limitation to them.
Exactly. And their criteria for choosing a location would be totally different from that pros and cons list.
Oh, I bet. What would they prioritize?
Well, they might prioritize access to resources,
Makes sense.
proximity to sacred sites,
Okay.
even the presence of certain animals or plants that are important to their culture.
Yeah, it's a whole different way of looking at the world.
It is.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how much our own upbringing shapes our views.
Absolutely.
Like,
We think we're making these objective decisions, but really we're just products of our environment.
it's true. And it's not just nomadic cultures.
Okay.
Imagine the perspective of a tightly knit indigenous community,
Okay.
a community whose identity is deeply intertwined with their ancestral land.
Right. Their connection to the land is so important.
Exactly. Now imagine how they might view a bustling city.
I don't know. It probably wouldn't be very appealing.
Probably not. They might see it as a place of alienation, a
Mm-hmm.
place where they're cut off from their roots and traditions.
Yeah, like a concrete jungle.
Exactly. So their arguments for village life might go way beyond the simple pleasures of community and nature.
I could see that.
They might talk about the spiritual significance of the land, the importance of preserving their cultural heritage,
Mm-hmm.
the interconnectedness of all living things.
It's like they're not just choosing a place to live.
Right.
They're choosing a way of life.
Precisely. And that way of life, it's about more than just convenience or opportunity.
It's about something deeper.
Exactly. It's about identity, belonging, connection.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
like we're opening up a whole new dimension to this debate.
We are. And it makes you think about all the other cultural perspectives we haven't even considered.
I know there must be so many different ways of looking at this.
There are. And that's what makes this exploration so fascinating.
It really is. It's like we're realizing that this simple question, village or city, it's not so simple after all.
Nope. It's a gateway to these profound conversations about culture values and how we see the world.
It makes you wonder what other seemingly simple questions might lead to these kinds of deep dives.
Right. Like what other assumptions are we carrying around
Yeah.
without even realizing it?
That's a good question. Maybe that's a deep dive for another day.
Definitely. So as we move into the final part of this exploration,
Okay.
I want to encourage you, our listener, to keep those questions coming.
Yeah, don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
Exactly. Because the more we question, the more we learn.
And who knows, maybe we'll even uncover some hidden truths about ourselves along the way.
Now, that would be a real deep dive.
It's wild to think how much our views on this whole village versus city thing
Yeah.
have been shaped by, like, movies and books.
Oh, totally.
Even just what people say around us.
It all adds up.
Yeah, it's like those portrayals kind of plant these seeds in our minds.
Right.
And then we start associating certain values with each lifestyle.
Like cities are all about excitement and opportunity,
Exactly.
while villages are more about peace and quiet.
Yeah, and we don't even stop to think where those ideas came from.
Nope. We just accept them as truth.
So how do we break free from that?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that those assumptions exist
Okay.
and then asking yourself, are these really I'm a YY beliefs?
Yeah.
Or have I just inherited them from the culture around me?
It's like questioning everything you thought you knew.
Kind of, yeah. It's about getting to the core of what truly matters to you.
So for city life,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that people are usually drawn to?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fast pace,
Okay.
the diversity, the endless possibilities.
Like you can be whoever you want to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the question is, are we drawn to those things because we genuinely value them
Yeah.
or because we've been conditioned to believe that those are the things we should value?
That's a good point.
And then for village life,
Uh-huh.
it's often about the sense of community,
Okay.
the tranquility,
Mm.
the connection to nature.
Right. But are we romanticizing it?
It's possible. Like maybe we're yearning for a simpler time,
Yeah.
a time that never really existed.
It's like we're projecting our own ideals onto these different lifestyles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to be honest with ourselves about that.
Yeah, to really examine our motivations.
Right. Because once you start questioning those deeply ingrained assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
you open yourself up to a whole new world of possibilities.
It's like breaking free from the mold.
Exactly. You might discover that you're drawn to aspects of both village and city life.
Okay.
Or you might find yourself gravitating towards a lifestyle that defies those traditional categories altogether.
Like something completely unique.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about creating a life that reflects your authentic values.
So it's not about picking a side.
Right.
It's about understanding yourself better.
And that's what makes this whole exploration so enriching.
Yeah. It's not just about village versus city.
Nope.
It's about recognizing the power of culture,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of critical thinking,
Absolutely.
and the incredible diversity of human experiences. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked about Western perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
the perspectives of English language learners,
Right.
even touched on the viewpoints of nomadic and indigenous cultures. But what about your perspective?
Exactly.
What are your unique experiences and cultural influences
Yeah.
that shape your views on village versus city life?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. And to add to that,
Okay.
I encourage you to go even further. Imagine this whole debate from the perspective of a culture
Yeah.
that's completely different from your own.
It's a mind-bending exercise.
It is.
But it can really stretch your thinking.
Yeah.
And help you appreciate the incredible range of human values and beliefs.
Absolutely. It's all about expanding our understanding,
Mm-hmm.
challenging ourselves to see the world through different lenses.
And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, keep exploring.